covering the Middle East, and I covered many crises and wars. I covered 2 Palestinian intifadas, 2 wars in Iraq, 2 wars in Gaza, a war in Lebanon. I covered, of course, the Arab uprising and its consequences. There is hardly anything in this last 25 years of my job which touched me more than the plight of Syrian refugees these days. And what you can see behind me is the picture of the 8-year-old Abdallah. I got this picture. He showed it to me in Beirut, in Lebanon. He's an 8-year-old Syrian refugee, and I think the picture speaks for itself. The question is really, what did a child experience that is drawing a picture like that, with a lot of blood and people ripped apart? At the beginning of the year, maybe if you remember, there was the blizzard in New York, or the announced blizzard in New York, let's say. The TV stations were talking about it, not only in the US, but also in Europe. They were talking about the blizzard, and it's going to snow in New York, and it was a huge topic at this day. At the same time, I was in Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, and at the same time, there were people, actually refugees, living in these shacks. Shacks that basically, like, only sheets separated them, plastic sheets separate them from the snow. There's several dozen people who died in this cold winter, and hardly anyone reported about it. I met Fatma. Fatma gave birth in January to a little girl, and this little girl died in the cold. So she said, I gave birth to a child in ice and snow, and it passed away in ice and snow. Fatma has no time to mourn, of course, because she has to continue to provide for her family. Here she cooks for her family in her shack. These are the daughters of Soha, in the age between 3 and 11 years old. Soha escaped from Syria and came to Egypt. And she wanted to make it across over the Mediterranean to Italy. And she left one day with one of these shabby boats and made it just not very far from the Egyptian coast at night, and the boat sank. Now, Soha was the only one who had a life vest on. So her 4 children were grabbing her in the water. And she was telling the story how she's trying to stay up. But of course, a life vest doesn't carry 5 people. And then she said, I had to decide. Which one of my daughters do I let go? And she still stayed above water, and she said, I couldn't decide which one should I leave. And then she just decided to let it go and just see what's going to happen. And the first one that drowned was the small one, the little one, drowning in the Mediterranean in the dark, because it was at night in the Mediterranean. And then the second one was the second girl, and the third girl. 3 of these girls are not alive any longer in this picture. And then she was picked out by the Egyptian Coast Guard. She and her oldest daughter. So she's just able to tell us this story, because there are many other stories we will never hear from people who drowned. In Egypt, I met also in a police station near Alexandria Ibrahim. He's 13 years old. He also tried to make it with his mother to Europe. And they made it during the day, and that was their mistake, because they were discovered by the Egyptian Coast Guard. And the Egyptian Coast Guard, because they are also under pressure from Europe to stop the refugee flow, the Egyptian Coast Guard shot at their ship, and 2 of the refugees died. One of them was Ibrahim's mother. His mother was shot right beside him. I met him 2 weeks later in the police station with 100 other refugees who were in this boat, 40 children. And I'm doing this job now since more than 2 decades, but I did not know What should I talk to him? What should I ask him? What do I ask a boy like this? And I said to him, so Ibrahim, what would you have done when you would have made it across over the Mediterranean with your mother? And his answer was then I would finally have gone back to school. I don't know where he is today. This is one of the things, you meet all these people doing this work, but I have no idea where Ibrahim is today, if he's still in Egypt or if he still made it or even to Europe. In the same police station there was Muntazir. And I asked him, so what was the time when you decided that you have to escape from Syria? And Syria, I need to know, just the numbers in Syria are stunning. In the last 4 years, average of life expectancy went down by 20 years. 2 decades life minus in the last 4 years. So I asked him, what was the point where you decided that you have to leave? And he said, we were living in an area in Damascus, in Yarmouk, and this area was controlled by the rebels, so consequently it was shelled every night by the government troops. And he said, it was the point when my 12-year-old daughter started to wet the bed again, out of fear every night. So I think everyone can imagine, or everyone who has children maybe can imagine what this means for parents to watch this. So I think there's something very important, something we have to remind ourselves, I think really every day when we look at this refugee crisis, and it's the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. It is sheer coincidence where you are born. You have the mercy of your birthplace here in Europe. You could be also born in Halab, in Aleppo, in Damascus, in Hama, in Mosul, or all the other cities you hear every day in the news. And you could be in the very same position than Soha, swimming somewhere in the Mediterranean and having to decide which one of your loved ones you have to let go. I think this is the best recipe to remind yourself every day about the mercy of your birthplace. This is the best recipe against indifference and against arrogance towards what is happening there in the Mediterranean with the refugee crisis. Now, what can we do? Let's take a case like Lebanon. What can we do in Europe, for example, in order to help here? Let's take a case like Lebanon. Lebanon today, every 4th person living in Lebanon is a Syrian refugee. Every 4th person. Austria, this would be 2 million people. Germany, this would be 20 million people. In the US, this would be 80 million people. Every 4th person. What a burden for a country like Lebanon. So what happens, in fact, is that there is hardly any money for refugee work in Lebanon. Let's take the case of children. This is one of many thousands of Syrian refugee children who are working in the streets of Beirut. I met him, I met many, many others. There are 500,000 children, Syrian children in school age in Lebanon. 320,000 of them don't go to school. That is a question of money. It's a whole lost generation that actually is the generation who one day supposed to build up their country again. They're the ones who are supposed to build up Syria again. This is the lost generation. What better investment we can have than investing in the school education of these children? This is one level Europe can do. You have to help the countries that take more than 90% of the refugees, and that are the neighboring countries of Syria, that is Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan mainly. Of course, there's also a political dimension, and that is our European political dimension. What we have now is that politicians are putting their head in the sand and thinking the whole problem will somehow pass. But of course it will not pass. These people will come, and they will come no matter how high you will make your walls. They will come because the level of despair on the other side is so high. They have hardly anything to lose. So they will come anyway. So we need some political visions here, And I expect from politicians to not administer a situation, but come up with a vision how to deal with this refugee problem. I like this one here. This is a school in Germany, in Salzhammer. These two children in the middle are two Syrian fellows on the school who got an order for deportation and to leave Germany. And that was the reaction of their school. They made a circle around them to protect them and published it on social media. There's other initiatives, because if states fail, you need also to have private initiatives which are basically a shame for states. That is one of these private initiatives. This is a private boat called Migrant Offshore Aid Station. This is a boat that was bought by a millionaire couple in Malta. And they bought this boat and they refurnished it so it could become a rescue boat. And they, until now, last year, rescued 3,000 people from the Mediterranean. And this year, just in the last 6 weeks, they rescued another 2,000 refugees from the Mediterranean. This is actually a shame for states that you have to have a private initiative to do that. And that is Luisa. Luisa is the daughter of this millionaire couple. She's 19 years old, and she's a very impressive 19-year-old. She just finished her school, and normally she should go to university now, but she decided not to go. She will continue to help on this boat. And it was very impressive to talk to her. She said, well, I remember that there came, at the beginning when I started, there came this guy, we brought him out of the water, and he was in total disbelief. He couldn't believe. He kissed the floor of the boat, and he looked at me, and he looked at me with his eyes of disbelief that he's still alive. And she said, I will never forget this look. This is a 19-year-old who's seen much more than many people in a much older age. And she said something very impressive to me, because I think this is a generation of hope here, people like her. She said, when I will have children one day, I hope that then this problem will be over. It can't be that we have the year 2015 and people are dying in the Mediterranean and other people looking the other way. She said, what is happening to our humanity? What is happening to our soul? And that's maybe a sentence to consider. Just think about it, that one day maybe your grandchildren will ask you what I have done when I knew that there are people drowning every day in the Mediterranean when they tried to make their way to Europe. And then I will say, I was debating with others that the boat is full. I'm afraid of the day that one day I will have to justify myself. Thank you very much.